Hello everyone, I know I don't normally post things like this on TikTok or anything, but I really wanted. I just saw this video by Luca Lorenzo, and honestly, I just wanted to react to this because I wanted to explain the contents of the video and why the things that he said wouldn't work in general, and I just want to say this in general, right? So let's begin.
Aġna inti tipo dawn l-aperturi, like tarafhom li huma tal-aluminium. Jena naħseb li dibiċċa xogħol li Malta biss like inħobbu nużaw l-aluminium, il-gypsum. Immaġina kieku kien hemm xi landmarks daw turisti madwar id-dinja ma ddeċiedu biex jużaw il-materjali li nħobbu aħna l-Maltin. Eżempju,
Okay, so this is every time, but basically, before, for those who didn't understand Maltese, Luca was essentially saying that lots of the apertures that are being used today are made by aluminium because, well, aluminium is a cheap material, and also aluminium is very malleable to use, and you can put into many shapes, and also it is very resistant to heat due to it having quite a high resistance to heat and avoiding warping, and also due to Malta's obviously environment as an island, it doesn't rust. Listen to when I said doesn't rust and not that doesn't corrode, because obviously aluminium, like any other metal, oxidizes, right? And technically, also things like gypsum and fiberboard are used, but they use in more commercial buildings. But it does make sense to what he's saying, that aluminium isn't used as much in other countries, but they are being used more and more modern construction. It's just that Malta is just more widespread of it. I believe it began using it since 1980s, due to its properties that I've mentioned before. What he's going to mention in the back is essentially the Eiffel Tower, which was built in the 1880s by Gustave Eiffel, complete out of aluminium, as you can clearly see.
dan huwa l-Eiffel Tower ta' Pariġi, imma flok użaw il-ħadid, użaw l-aluminium palma andananti mal-gallerija. Din hija l-piramida
Okay, so let's go a little bit more back. So,
piramida ta' andananti mal-gallerija. Din
for fuck's sake,
mal-gallerija.
stop. So, the reason why the Eiffel Tower was made out of aluminium was, one, because steel was cheaper, because technically, if you think about it, right?
L-piramida ta' Giza
Fuck
kien
up. Okay, so basically the reason was this. So aluminium was discovered in 1825 by the Danish, right? The thing was, aluminium was a very complicated material to extract. It's not like, for example, steel, which we have discovered many years ago, which essentially is just iron and treated, right? And has basically become one of the cheapest materials you can get, and one of those abundant as well. Aluminium for a very long time, until the 20th century, right? So basically, way after the Eiffel Tower was being built, was quite expensive material. Actually, the Russian family, for example, which is a great example, actually had lots of fine jewelry, lots of fine tableware, which were made of aluminium, which was seen as an expensive material equivalent to silver and gold. But the thing was this. Around the 1880s, 1890s, about 1886, so about the same time this was built, they found this cheaper way that we see use today of treating and extracting aluminium from its ore to what we use today. Okay? But the thing is that aluminium didn't really catch on until maybe the beginning, a little bit before World War II, which is about the 1930s, due to things such as the construction of the Spitfire and other English planes, and it's slowly and surely being used for more and more materials, where people are finding out that it's much lighter, it doesn't rust, and also its use points for things which are much better than iron. You know, it's obviously a situational thing. The reason why the Eiffel Tower wasn't built out of aluminium and made out of steel was actually, fun fact, it wasn't originally supposed to be a standing structure. Actually, it was reported to be a complete eyesore, and it was hated, and it was actually supposed to be a temporary structure for the Paris World Trade Fair, but it just stayed there for a long time. Actually, there are many stories of people actually trying to scrap it, and lots of people committing scams of trying to sell the Eiffel Tower to scrappers because of how much of an eyesore it was reported to be. And technically, Gustave Eiffel built a secret apartment inside, right? But I will show another video if you guys are interested. But essentially, steel was cheap. Gustave Eiffel, who is an amazing engineer, an amazing designer, also the person who built the Statue of Liberty, and also wrote some of the oldest recorded works and studies of aerodynamics, essentially built it to be a temporary thing, but just stayed longer. So and also due to the time period of when it was built for iron and steel being a much more a much more viable, a much more cost-effective way of building. So that's why there's no aluminium. Now he's showing us the Great Pyramids of Giza, which are a much older structure.
Iku flok użaw il-ġebel dawa kisjatura bil-ġipsum, jiġifieri tipo biċċa xogħol ta' talent kbira la Stephen.
Okay. I don't know how you can build a structure without stone and put gypsum on it. You need to have the stone to build the structure in the first place. And it wouldn't even make any viable sense because technically gypsum was discovered in the 1800s around about, and the Great Pyramids were built around thousands of years before Christ. Actually, the Great Pyramids are so old that technically Cleopatra, the same woman that was married to Julius Caesar, is closer to us than she was to the Great Pyramids of Giza, you know. And technically, fun fact, gypsum was only starting to be used in gypsum boards around 1916, so during the First World War, which proves that technically Cleopatra, you know, is closer to the invention of the gypsum board than she is to the Great Pyramid, showing more and more that would not be viable, or would it not make any sense, because technically the Great Pyramid was completely covered with limestone and had a giant golden block put on top, because this was essentially, right, the quintessential markings of what a pharaoh had to basically show off as his, how can I say this in the best way, essentially his building to go to the, you know, the pharaoh afterlife, because of them being seen as the God on earth, essentially what all monarchs believe them to be, essentially gods in the human realm with their own divine being and their own divine right to rule. Right? The third place mentioned is this.
Il-famuża Kappella Sistina, imma flok għandek il-fuq ta' Leonardo, għandek is-suffett biex tattilu.
That is not no, Leonardo da Vinci did not do the Sistine Chapel. It was Michelangelo. I do not know how the fuck you can fuck up basic information like that, right? Not only that, Michelangelo did the Sistine Chapel ceiling between 1508 and 1512, to the point that he worked so hard on it that his neck was always stiff for the rest of his life due to this work, right? And these are essentially gypsum boards, which I have previously mentioned, were technically invented in 1916, you know. And I know he's going to do like a little joke on, for example, how, like, you know, they never... Yeah, of course they're not going to let you take photos, because sometimes, right, the flashing, right, could damage the paint. This is an almost half a millennium old painting, right? Of course, there are some things that I heard that, like, they flash special lights so you could see, so only the Pope can see. But yeah, it is private property owned by the nation of the Vatican City, which lets them do what they want. And I don't think it would make any sense to build a building especially as beautiful as this. And not only that, a building like the Sistine, like St. Peter's Basilica and Sistine, buildings that were so expensive, they caused multiple funding rounds that caused the separation of the church. 1517, one of the biggest reasons was tithings, and how they've pushed more into tithings to try and gain income to build this absolutely massive structure, due to obviously having massive costs. Some people believe that the Sistine Chapel in today's money would be to rebuild, so the Sistine Chapel, including the Vatican and everything else, and St. Peter's Basilica, would cost between 5 to 20 billion euros in today's money, meaning that I think it would be an absolute waste if you'd built this absolutely massive and beautiful chapel and decided to go like, I know what to do, let's put fucking gypsum board on the top. Despite it literally being the painting of Sistine Chapel being around I'm being very accurate right now, 504 years away from the invention of gypsum boards in the first place. And by the way, those quote-unquote soffit panels aren't gypsum most of the time. They are fiberglass due to fiberglass's insulating properties. I know it's supposed to be a joke, but but in my mind, I just want to get this clear because some people might go like, makes sense. No, it doesn't make any sense. It's doing it for a joke. Make it Maltese doesn't even make any sense. If you want to make it Maltese, go to like Maltese or Maltese Baroque, which is actually it's such a unique and such a diverse and such a I'm going to go back to the word unique. Such a unique architectural style that's actually an architectural style of itself, Maltese or Maltese Baroque, a representation on how actually through architecture the church tried to show off and re-represent itself in a time where where the churches were being separated, people were being separated by religion. We're saying post 1517, and how more and more the funding from the New World and funding from essentially multiple raids from the Ottoman Empire helped fund one of the most beautiful and diverse ranges of architecture the Maltese nations ever had, and especially post 1693 due to the Malta Sicilian earthquake. It was so grand that the old St. Paul's Cathedral was completely gone, right? I know I shouldn't have done this. I don't know why I'm going to put this on TikTok, but I'm going to do it anyway because honestly, I would have wanted to like teach people about this, and I hope you guys do enjoy. So yeah.